Welcome to Everyday Cooking with Ann. You know, good food is a way to connect with others and create great memories. And hundreds of people have bought my cookbooks as I have catered weddings and events over the years. And now I'd like to become your personal cooking coach and help you make great food step by step from scratch. And I will post a new video every week, twice a week. Thank you. Welcome to Everyday Cooking with Ann. Today I'm going to teach you how to make fluffy rolls. It's in my cookbook. The recipe is there for you. Let me tell you a little bit about this roll recipe. I have made these rolls for several weddings and other occasions. It's very similar to another recipe in my book called Lion House Rolls, which is a famous roll that is served at the Lion House, where they are tall and fluffy, and everybody in the world who's had these rolls say, "Oh, I wish I knew how to make these rolls." Well, I have got the technique down and I'm going to show you how to do it today. This recipe is very similar to other roll recipes that I've showed you, and let me just tell you the secret to fluffy, feathery rolls is using the scalded milk, which I'm preparing for you right now. I'm going to go ahead and tell you we're waiting for it to scald right now. And I've told you in other recipes that we're waiting just for the bubble around the edge, and I'm waiting right now for it to get to that point. So we're waiting for that, and we're going to be adding to the scalded milk, we're going to be adding half a cup of sugar, a teaspoon of salt, and a cube of unsalted butter. I want to wait till it's starting to scald so that it'll melt completely. You can see my milk is already scalded. I'm scalding around because you see the little bubbles around the middle. Now I'm going to turn this down a little bit because you do not want this to bubble over into boiling. I'm adding the butter and the sugar, the half a cup of sugar, and also a teaspoon of my favorite salt. I'm going to stir this up a little bit. And as soon as this butter has completely melted, we'll be taking it over to our bowl. This is our steaming hot milk with the sugar, the salt, and the butter melted in, ready to go. It just has a little bit of butter left to melt here. Okay, when I'm making rolls, especially with hot liquid, you can see, first of all, over here I have my yeast, which is bubbling up. I put 2 tablespoons of fresh yeast in here. You can use granulated regular yeast. I haven't really tried this with the instant yeast, but you could try that and see if it works as well. But I'm using what I'm most familiar with. This yeast has been rising for about 5 minutes before I put it in about a cup of water. I know the recipe says a 1/4 cup of water, but I like to put a little bit more water in just to give it make it easier to dissolve with a teaspoon of sugar in the yeast. So you can be forgiving about some of the recipe amounts because it's all going to be mixed with flour anyway. So whatever you feel most comfortable doing. This is going to be also a rich tasting dough dinner roll. So we're going to be using these 3 eggs, which I will now. What I have is several cups more than I've got a couple of cups of extra flour here rather than what the recipe calls for, which is 5½ cups. If you see my other videos, I do mention the amount of flour. Depending on the humidity and other things, you may use more or less flour than that. But what I like to do, once I take my flour out of my bin, and this is bread flour, by the way, which I use in almost every bread recipe that I use. It has a higher protein content. It adds more gluten to the recipe, which creates the effect you want to have in your finished product, meaning lighter, fluffier rolls. Okay, I always use a wire whisk or something like that to actually sift this flour ahead of time, so that when you're putting the flour in, you're not going to be putting big clumps of flour in. You want it to have the silky sifted effect as it goes into your recipe. Now, the other technique I use in almost all my bread and rolls recipe is that I always add a couple of cups of flour to start. This is going to basically cool off the hot milk that I have in here. See, it's still a little bit steamy here. I'm going to add just a little bit more flour, just to cool this down a bit, maybe another ½ cup. So this is our third cup, just so you know. Watching me, I'll try to keep track so you can see how much I used in this recipe today. Okay, this is still quite warm. I'm gonna let this, and actually, I'm gonna let this rest just a few minutes before we put the rest of the ingredients in, and that's always a good idea, whether you need to or not sometimes, because that extra resting just gives that little bit of readiness for receiving the yeast and the eggs that I'll put in just a moment. It's cooled down a little bit. I cooled it down for about 5 or 10 minutes, waiting for this to not be too hot to add our yeast and eggs. So first I'm going to add our 3 eggs to our mixture. And now you can see our yeast over here is all ready to go in. It's nice and bubbled up and ready to be added as well. Okay, now we're adding the rest of our cup number 3. And from here on out, we're just adding a cup at a time. This will be number 4 of flour. And we're just adding flour to the right consistency to actually do a little bit of kneading, but not much for this type of roll, the fluffy roll. If you saw my last video about how to mix this dough, you can skip ahead if you want till I show you in the next segment or step 2 of how we're going to do these rolls different than the cinnamon rolls. And it's about the right consistency. It's not tough or anything. It's still pretty light and fluffy, and I'm going to just add a little bit of flour to my counter. Remove the dough. Now I'm just I can feel it right now. It's still a little bit warm to the touch, but I'm just gently kneading it, putting a little extra flour in as I need, so that it doesn't stick to my hands or to the table. And it's incorporating a little bit more flour, but you can see it's starting to form up nicely with just maybe a minute or 2 of light kneading. At this point, I'm not adding a lot of flour now because it's perfectly done as far as being able to slide around on my table without sticking. So you know when that happens, don't add any more flour. Now, if this was going to be a regular bread recipe, I would need this probably for 10 or 15 minutes to develop the gluten, but that's not what we're doing with these light, fluffy rolls. Okay, it's getting a little bit stickier now. So I'm going to stop the kneading. I'm going to take my bowl. I have a little bit of just maybe a tablespoon or 2 of vegetable oil. And I'm taking my actually craggy dough sitting in my bowl, putting the oil in the bottom here. I'm going to swish this around with the back of my hand so that when I add my dough, I'm going to put it upside down so that the top of your dough is nicely covered with the oil so it doesn't dry out. At this point, you can see how much dough is in the bottom of the bowl. And now I'm going to cover my bowl with a towel, a light cover towel. Take it to my oven because I have a proofing button where I can actually proof my dough within an hour because it's at the perfect temperature for proofing dough. If you don't have one of those accessories on your stove, you can go ahead and put it into a dry, clean, a warm place in your kitchen or somewhere else and let it raise for about an hour. Okay, we're on to step 2 of making the fluffy rolls. I'm going to show you the dough, and I want to take a couple of minutes to tell you a little bit about rising dough. Sometimes, you know, an hour is perfectly fine. It's just something you need to be aware of, that you can let it go a little longer, but I don't recommend anything longer than a couple of hours. Okay, so I'm going to punch down our dough right now. You can see it's gone to the top of the bowl. And I'm gonna just get the bubbles out a little bit here. Okay, and now what I'm gonna do is, I've shown you this before. This is my pastry cloth. I've already scraped off from the last time I used it all the little bit of butter and flour and stuff that's kind of seeps into it. The reason I use this cloth, and it's my favorite thing, you can use whatever kind of mat you would like. I know there's a lot of silicone mats and things like that out there that work well, but I've been using this method for like 40 years and it's just worked really well for me. But this is just what you could do as well if you'd like. So I've gone ahead and seasoned it a little bit. When the flour gets into the mat, then it's not going to go over to over flouring your roll. Okay, and I'm going to take this out right now, and it's still feeling pretty warm to the touch too. So I'm going to cut this in half. We'll use that a little bit later. Now I have, now this is kind of the secret to these fluffy rolls, is that I'm going to roll this out to kind of like how I'm going to be, I would do cinnamon rolls, but I'm going to be showing you how I roll these. You want to get those bubbles out. Oh, what I do too a lot of times is I put a little bit of flour on my stockinette as well. It helps it roll out easier. You can see there's some bubbles on here, and I want to kind of mash those out. I'm ready to cut the dough in half now. And this dough is about 16 inches in length, just so if you wanted to measure it for some reason, but I'm going to cut it, just eyeballing it in half, I think, pretty close. And then I'm going to cut it into thirds, so I'm going to be making, I'm going to cut it in half again, this way. Okay, and now I'm going to be cutting each one into thirds. It'll give me 12 rolls. Okay, so I'm going to cut it in about thirds. Like here, I'm just going to measure it where I think it might look the best. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to cut these. Okay. So you can see they're in little, pretty much rectangles. Now what I do is I melted some butter, and one of the secrets for these rolls and any of the rolls that I make that I want to be light and fluffy is they're all dipped in butter. So I've got quite a bit of butter here because I'm doing another batch as well here. So let's go ahead. I'm going to take each roll and I'm just going to roll it like this and pinch it. So it looks like that. I'm going to dip it in my pan. I'm going to take the next roll and you don't mash it out or anything. You just gently roll it, pinch it, dip it, and put it in your pan. Now you want to leave a little space between here so that each roll will have a place to raise nice and fluffy. Okay, our rolls are set out in the pan. You can see that I'm leaving some space between them so they'll have a place to rise big and fluffy. I didn't fit them all in one pan, so I used another pan to make sure that we have them just the way we want to have them. I'm going to proof these now, or rise these now, for about 45 minutes, and I'll show you what they look like before we put them in the oven to bake. Our rolls have risen exactly 45 minutes and they look absolutely perfect to go into the oven, and they're going to rise a little bit more when they're baked. I have it on my convection oven at 350 degrees. We're going to bake these rolls for 20 minutes, and then you're going to see luscious heaven burst forth when you get to see what they look like. Okay, we just turned our luscious rolls out of the oven. And you can see they're just perfectly golden brown, and you can see that they all had risen and they're touching one another and they're nice and big. I took a roll out of the other pan just to show you. You honestly do not need to put any more butter in these rolls because they're almost like a croissant. They're just full of buttery goodness. I'm just gonna take it apart with you just to show you how fluffy and feathery the roll is. This is really good. My very favorite thing to put in this roll is apricot jam, but you can pick your favorite, or just eat it, or you can put sandwich meats or anything you want because they're nice and big and fluffy. And so we hope you will try this recipe and enjoy how your family is going to love these new fluffy big dinner rolls. Thank you for watching my videos. As your personal cooking coach, I'm here to guide you along the way and give you tips to make the recipe successful. Please post a comment below with any questions, suggestion, or requests for new items you would like me to teach. And let me know how the recipe works out for you. Thank you.